Thank you, Ashok. It's been quite a learning experience for me personally to be part of this. But I'm not as clear as Professor Prabhakar gave you the elaborate. My presentation, or our presentation, sorry, is little more confused. I won't say confused, but little more. It was more discussion, less of consensus, because societal issues and challenges are so many, as Ashok just mentioned. It's not something that we can sit down and start listing and decide on. This is the where we want to do our research on. But what we did was basically agreed to agree on certain principles that we should talk about when we talk about ICT addressing societal challenges. And I think first and foremost was that look at our own realities, and obviously our realities are looked at the frame that we look at. And so we did focus a lot on funding, as Professor Prabhakar already explained, what planning and policy making happens in Europe and what planning and policy making happens in India, and what are our priorities, what are our issues that concern us, and are they the realities that needs to be addressed from the point of view of ICT research in India. And we were very clear that we are not focusing on ICT. We are focusing on challenges that ICT as an enabler can address. Often, we techies, I'm not a techie, but usually techies, as they call them, are so obsessed with technology that they forget that that's not the goal. That's not the end in itself. It's only a means to an end. And so that's a starting point or principle that we all agreed on, that we're not going to talk about ICTs or what ICTs can do. Let's talk about what are the challenges that needs to be addressed by that ICTs can help on. And I think another very critical input that Munib here provided was that how it has to be driven by some values that are inherent in cultures, societies. And so how can these values, only when they're embedded in these values, that access and uptake of any kind of technology that we think of can be can really happen. So, we talked about values and we talked about that. And of course, finally, we talked about the rights approach, because I think eventually it's all about rights and how we can fulfill rights, and how rights play a critical role, whether it's rights of a minority group or based on gender or sexual differences. We need to be very conscious of those issues. So based on these principles, we looked at how and what are the critical issues that we needed to address. And interestingly, when we looked at the landscape in EU and in India, and if, for example, in the 11th five-year plan, the word inclusion comes so much, and we talked a lot about case studies, our own research, a lot of stories from personal stories from a lot of people, anecdotes, and we ended up saying that sab naam ke vaste. It's all in words. It's nothing happening in reality. So how do we make inclusion happen? So we started off the discourse or the discussion from that perspective, and obviously we came down to saying the issues of social justice, equity are critical in inclusion, and the issues of access to public services, whether it's health or right to information or right to education, or it's about livelihoods or guarantee to employment or claims or entitlements. These all issues come under the issue of inclusion. So we were looking at in these broader issues, and like I mentioned to you earlier, we're still work in progress. There's still concurrence about broader issues that we want to further elaborate on, but we haven't yet come down to what actual processes that ICT will address. But we did look into the broader issues, and inclusion was one of them. The second one, and I think I'll ask Monib to pitch in here, but I think the second one that were critical in the whole process of reaching that inclusion, it's not an ideal, but it's something that we do want as a society to reach. The issue of how do we talk, the core of the issue, or the core issue of governance, or the core issue of democracy, and how we can include participation and bring in efficacy and efficiency. and ultimately strengthen our public institutions came up quite a bit. Munib, do you want to add something here? Yeah, okay. So, because we did believe in the whole idea of participation and cooperation, so we felt that everybody should pitch in. And so, Nicole and Muni, please add in when you want to. So, the common issues based on these two broad, as of now, broader agendas that our group came up with were that there were some common issues that were emerging based on these principles, and right to identity, whether it's right to identity for enjoying diversity, right to a religion, right to sexual preferences, right to caste, ethnicity, and the whole idea of social of strengthening those identities and expression or communication was some that we all felt was both common in Europe and India that can be explored further. And also the concept of community action, which is again inherent in our own culture, whether it's civil society movements at the grassroots level or in the villages, or led by the ICT, some of the ICTs in Europe, how we can use those to strengthen in mutually supported initiatives that can help and learn from each other. And finally, we looked at some social cultural implications or changes that both societies are going through, whether it's the young in India here who are overpowered with, bombarded with messages from mass media and new media, and whether it's the elderly in the Europe who are being faced with challenges and new applications that are implications of ICT. So just to kind of, like I said, again, it's a work in progress, and we will further brainstorm more and, of course, welcome ideas from all of you here. This is, again, something that Munib has come up, which is very interesting. He looks at our discussion as a vertebrate of all the ICT discussions that we are happening, whether it's in India or in Europe or in India. It's a vertebrate that is interconnected and it's growing. And what is the reality? And how India and Europe is connected with the issues of knowledge, right to access, right to health, right to education, and access to education. And it's an ongoing process, and still we are building on this vertebrate. So like on that, I just like to end with that, because like I said, it's not as concrete as Dr. Prabhakar presented, but it's still developing ideas and issues that I think ICT plays a potential role as an enabler. Munib, Nicole, do you want to add anything further on that? Okay, thank you.